Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're wandering the narrow, gaslit veins of Victorian London, a city of coal smoke, clipped manners, and the soft shuffle of boots on damp cobblestones. You're not a detective or a gentleman of standing, just an ordinary soul drifting into the quiet orbit of a street gang that promises belonging and delivers something entirely different. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You step into the alley as though the fog itself has invited you. It curls around your boots like a shy cat, drifting with the hesitant grace of something that has learned to move quietly through London for its own protection. The dawn is still deciding whether it wants to appear at all, and the sky above you holds the pale grey softness of a city that prefers to wake reluctantly. You breathe in the damp morning air. It carries the faint scent of coal smoke from distant chimneys, mixed with the tang of yesterday's rain and the faint sweetness of bakeries preparing their first loaves. All of it settles into your chest with a quiet weight, as though reminding you that Victorian London rarely hurries, even when its people do. You have wandered here intentionally, though you pretend to yourself that chance guided your feet. The stories you heard about the alley, about the young men who rule it with an odd blend of charm, structure, and menace, felt strangely appealing. You imagined companionship, you imagined belonging, you imagined something far warmer than the life you were drifting through. And so, in a moment of restless longing, you allowed rumours to lead you here, into a narrow passage that feels part street, part throat, as though the city is politely swallowing you whole. Your footsteps echo softly, absorbed by stone walls that rise too steeply on either side. You sense that the alley has watched many people pass through, but rarely with the naive hope you carry now. A long strip of faded brick leads you forward, and lamplight clings to the damp surfaces, as if reluctant to let go. You notice how every rattling window shutter, every rusted drain pipe, leans slightly inward, as though listening. It is quiet enough that you hear your own breathing. Quiet enough that every detail seems to step forward in the silence. Quiet enough that you begin to notice the unsettling calm felt only in places where danger has learned to whisper instead of shout. You expected, perhaps, some sign of the gang before seeing them. A carved initial, a coded mark, something scratched onto stone by confident hands. Instead, the alley remains as politely uninformative as a Victorian drawing room. Nothing reveals itself prematurely. Nothing is out of place. It is almost disappointing, almost comforting, and entirely strange. Then you hear it, the soft murmur of voices ahead, not loud, not hurried, not angry. The tone resembles the kind of conversation men have while waiting for tea to cool. It is a low, steady rhythm, with a hint of amusement curling at the edges of the words. You cannot make out what they are saying, only that the voices belong to people who are untroubled by the hour, unbothered by the cold, and completely aware of your presence. Your pace slows. Part of you expected a rowdy gathering, rough laughter ricocheting off the brick. Instead, the voices are measured, as though rehearsed, polite even. The sort of civility that would be entirely unremarkable if it weren't happening in a forgotten alley at dawn. You turn a corner and finally see them. A small group of young men stands beneath a gas lamp, whose flame trembles gently in the morning air. Their coats are worn but neatly buttoned, their boots polished despite the mud around them. The fog softens their edges, making them appear like figures from a dream that is too organized to be comforting. They notice you instantly, though none of them acknowledges it directly. Their conversation continues for a few seconds, as though politeness demands that they not interrupt themselves merely because a stranger has walked into their domain. When they finally turn their attention to you, It is with the calm curiosity of people observing an animal. They expect it to arrive eventually. One of them steps slightly forward, only slightly, nothing so bold as a deliberate approach. His hair is slicked back with a level of care that feels almost ceremonial, and his posture is impeccable in the way that comes from taking oneself very seriously. His eyes glide over you, not suspicious, simply assessing, the way a shopkeeper might examine a coin to ensure it hasn't been clipped. "Morning," he says softly, tipping his head a fraction of an inch. "You seem far from home." The words are pleasant, the tone is pleasant, even the expression he wears is pleasant, and yet the warmth you hoped for refuses to materialize. Instead, you feel an odd stiffness beneath his civility, as though his politeness is less a welcome and more a requirement in their world. You return the greeting, though your voice sounds much smaller than you intended. He smiles faintly, the kind of smile that appears out of courtesy rather than emotion. Around him, the others regard you with the same soft detachment. No one steps closer, no one moves away. They form a quiet semicircle, leaving just enough space for you to stand without feeling entirely included. You tell them why you're here, or rather, you offer the version of the truth you have rehearsed. You say you heard they look after their own. You mention needing a place, needing people. You speak with the unsteady tone of someone who isn't used to asking for anything. They listen with unnerving patience. When you finish, the young man nods as though he expected every word. "Belonging is a fine thing to seek," he says, as though delivering a moral lesson, "but it does come with responsibilities." The others hum their agreement, a soft chorus that blends seamlessly with the fog. You find yourself standing very still, because the gentleness in their voices hides something weightier beneath it, something unspoken, something binding. Another boy steps forward, slightly younger, with a face that would be cherubic if not for the tired intelligence behind his eyes. He does not smile when he speaks. "Once you walk with us, you walk properly," he says, each word crisp and quiet. "We keep order. We expect order. It's rather necessary, you understand." You nod, though you understand nothing. The way he says order makes it sound like a lace collar, constricting, decorative, compulsory. A third boy, leaning against the lamppost, adds, "Impropriety causes trouble. We do prefer avoiding that." His tone is light, almost conversational, but the fog seems to tighten at his words. You inhale slowly, as though testing the air for warnings. They do not threaten you. They do not ask for proof of loyalty or demand anything grand. Instead, they simply watch you, each wearing an expression of polite expectation, as though waiting to see whether you will behave correctly. The calmness is disarming, the softness is suffocating. You realize with a faint shiver that these young men have mastered the art of appearing harmless while suggesting, ever so gently, that stepping backward is no longer an option. The first young man gestures down the alley. "Walk with us," he says. "London's quieter this hour. A fine time for introductions." The invitation is phrased like an offer, but you sense the firm structure hidden beneath. You fall into step beside them, moving deeper into a fog that feels heavier with each breath. As you walk, the alley seems to reshape itself around you. The walls lean closer. The lamplight fades into a dim gold. You feel the presence of the boys beside you, not threatening, not welcoming, simply there, as steady as the heartbeat you suddenly notice, hammering faintly in your ears. You expected danger in sharp lines and loud voices. Instead, it settles around you in soft tones and well-kept coats, in quiet rules hinted at through measured glances. You start to understand that this world lives not on chaos, but on a peculiar strain of Victorian propriety, one that demands obedience wrapped in courtesy. You keep walking, breathing the cool morning air, trying to ignore the sensation that the fog is no longer simply drifting, but guiding you forward with deliberate care. And somewhere deep within you, a small realization flickers, gentle, undeniable, and far too late. You came here seeking warmth. What you have found instead is something far more intricate, far more restrained, and quietly far more dangerous. You follow their slow, measured steps deeper into the alley, and the quiet that surrounds you feels less like absence and more like a presence that has been taught manners. There is a rhythm here, a pattern of movement and voice that steadies itself around the group like a well-tailored coat. You're interested in belonging, and for a time that interest softens your attention. You let the cadence of their speech and the gentle touch of their etiquette wash over you. It is possible to mistake ceremony for kindness when you are tired. They do not announce rules with trumpets or banners. Rules arrive instead as small gestures, a particular way of straightening a collar, the moment when conversation politely falls silent, the polite inclination of a head that signals both recognition and assessment. Each gesture is taught in the same tone of voice you might use to soothe a child to sleep, steady, soft, untroubled, yet something rigid underpins it, the quietness of a law that expects to be obeyed. Hands where they can be seen, the older one murmurs as you pass a narrow doorway. He says it like an instruction for arranging cutlery at dinner, which is precisely the point. The instruction is simple, functional, and oddly intimate. It draws attention to the smallest parts of your behaviour and shapes them with the same care a seamstress uses on a stitch. You comply, folding your hands almost without thinking, because the compliance is tidy and small and simple to perform. It is odd how easily obedience can feel like relief. They teach you to move in a way that does not attract needless attention. Walk with a purpose but not too swift. Glance neither too often nor too little. Laugh if necessary, at the right moments and in measured amounts. Where other gangs might favour loud displays, shouts, swagger, brazen displays of dominance, this one has perfected an economy of motion. The polish of restraint replaces the spectacle of force. You begin to understand that here, decorum is a means of control. Names, you are told, are flexible. A person's given name is saved for the household and the hearth. On the street, titles matter more. You will be addressed by a sobriquet that signals your place in the order. It feels trivial at first, a quaint custom that will make for good stories later, but the new name arrives like a new fabric worn over your skin, thin, woven with caution, and it moulds itself to you. Others will test the fit. They will say your nickname in passing, the ease of the syllables telling them, without further words, whether you have accepted the rules. There is an etiquette of payment. You learn that belonging is not free. It has a price that is both literal and social. Small sums are collected on certain mornings, an offering, a contribution, a tax. The act of handing over a coin is performed with ceremony. The coin is placed on a palm and then accepted with a nod, as though the exchange is a sacred ritual. The amount is rarely ruinous, and yet you quickly discover its true weight. Payments bind you. They are receipts written not on parchment, but on conscience. You count the money more than once in your head, and notice how your shoulders dip when the collection is near. There are rules about speech. Complaints are to be expressed with restraint. Grievances are to be handled without spectacle. You learn to keep your frustrations folded away like a neat handkerchief. Public disputes are rare, and when they occur, they are settled with ceremonies that prioritize appearance over reconciliation. A humiliating bow, a forced apology, a small public task. Each serves to remind the offender of the decorum expected. The punishments are not theatrical. They are precise and efficient. The intent is less to break the individual violently and more to adjust him into the pattern the group prefers. Etiquette extends to time. There are appointed hours for tasks and quieter hours for reflection. You are instructed to be punctual as though this alone were a virtue. Tardiness is noticed. It is noted in the same soft voice used to observe the weather, and you feel it wrap around you with its polite reproach. The demand that you respect time is a slender, relentless pressure, and it begins to change how you think about yourself. When a clock's chime falls too soon or too late, you sense the anxious ripple that runs through the group, the way their composure is slightly unsettled by anything outside the expected pattern. Even violence, when it appears, bears the stamp of civility. There is a careful choreography to discipline, an ordered meeting, a chair offered, a glass of water placed on the table. Harsh words, when spoken, are spoken as if reciting an unpleasant but necessary part of a play. There are no wild brawls. There is instead a clinical arrangement of power, and the grammar of force is couched politely. You watch as one of the younger boys is corrected for a thoughtless remark. His punishment is not a broken bone, but a humiliation arranged to look like instruction. The indignity is measured to teach, never to maim, yet the lesson sinks in with the bitter residue of submission. Language itself holds secrets. They have a lexicon of phrases that indicate more than they say. A compliment can be a warning. A phrase like good fellow may be praise or a coded condemnation, depending on the emphasis. You notice how they speak in sentences that hang just so, how they incline their heads in the middle of an utterance to authenticate or nullify what they are saying. It is a gentle tyranny of nuance, a system where every syllable is a potential brick in a wall. You are taught to present yourself in a way that reassures the respectable citizens of the area. Polished boots, a collar pressed to a suspiciously perfect angle, a steady gaze that does not flinch from a magistrate's eye. These are the performative trappings that allow the gang to operate beneath a veneer of propriety. The outward appearance suggests a certain decency. Inside, the mechanism of control is invisible and meticulous. The irony is not lost on you. Decorum becomes the disguise for coercion. There is, too, a ritual of silence. Some conversations take place in whispers, others through absence. They value discretion as if it were a sacrosanct quality. You learn that silence can be louder than speech. A withheld response can be a sentence. The quieter you are, the more you may be trusted. An inverted meritocracy that rewards containment over candor. You begin to notice how the rules seep into daily life. You wake earlier without conscious intent, smoothing the bedsheet with hands that grew accustomed to small habitual efficiencies. You find yourself counting steps on the pavement to match the rhythm you have learned, pausing at doors to present the proper deference. The rituals do not hammer themselves into you suddenly. They arrive as faint adjustments, like a seam that tightens imperceptibly until you realize your chest feels bounded. At moments, the politeness is almost tender. An elder tucks a stray curl behind your ear with the casual concern one might show a younger sibling. A comrade offers a spare coat on a chilly night with the ceremonial modesty of a gentleman lending his best to a friend. These gestures are not false. They carry warmth and are performed with genuine care, and yet attended as they are by the system of rules, they also serve to remind you that kindness here is conditional. It is a currency as much as any coin. By the time the fog thins and the day moves toward a lighter grey, the new decorum has settled in the small bones of your routine. You find your hands smoothing your coat a fraction more often, your words measured with a degree of caution you had not anticipated. A tiny ache of astonishment forms at the back of your throat, how easily the clothes of civility can alter the shape of a person. You do not dream of chains or lockboxes. The confinement is less physical and more domestic. It is a well-laid couture of obligations, stitched together with the most polite of threads. The rules, whispered, formal and soft as a lullaby, have woven themselves around you, and you begin to move differently, as if under the weight of some invisible collar. The realization is quiet and unromantic, but it is there. The life you sought has terms you did not read, and those terms are spoken with nothing harsher than courteousness. The morning stretches itself thin as you walk with them, and the city seems to yawn in long, weary exhalations. You feel the change in the rhythm of the streets the moment you step beyond the narrow walls of the alley. London opens reluctantly, as though it resents being seen too early. The sky remains a pale, indecisive grey, the sort of colour that settles over buildings like an old blanket that has forgotten brighter days. You keep close to the group without meaning to. The etiquette they have already begun guiding you through seems to press at your shoulders, shaping the pace of your steps. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick with last night's mist. In their sheen you see dim reflections, the hunched silhouettes of buildings, crooked as aging spines, and the soft flicker of lamps still clinging to their dwindling glow. When your heel strikes the stone, it feels as though the street sighs beneath you, tired, patient, and used to carrying the weight of many more feet than yours. A carriage rattles in the distance. The sound arrives like a tired heartbeat, the clop of the horse slow and measured. You can hear the steady rhythm long before the carriage reveals itself. When it eventually rounds a corner, the horse seems as weary as the city, its breath curling through the cool morning in faint clouds. The wheels hit a deeper groove in the road, and the resulting wobble shakes loose a drizzle of dust from a nearby windowsill. London does not hide its age. It displays it with the unbothered dignity of something that has survived far worse than damp and dawn. As you drift deeper into the web of lanes that form the gang's territory, you realise how easy it is to become lost here. Not lost in the thrilling way one imagines when dreaming of adventure, but lost in a suffocating sense of sameness. Every alley resembles the last, every turn a mirror of the turn before. The city folds in on itself, forming corridors that seem designed more for the movement of shadows than people. The boys walk with effortless familiarity. They move as though the streets lean aside for them. Each corner, each bend, each narrow pass is treated with quiet reverence. They do not speak loudly. They do not rush. Their confidence is not the loud swagger of storybook ruffians, but something subtler, shaped by routine and expectation. You follow, noting the precision with which they adjust their pace depending on the width of the street or the tilt of the pavement, as though the geography itself demands obedience. A cat darts across the lane, disappearing beneath a splintered cart. One of the boys offers a nod in its direction, as though even stray animals must be acknowledged properly here. You sense how even the smallest gestures seem to carry unnecessary significance. It is as though the streets have become a kind of stage on which each member performs his role with unspoken discipline. And now, somehow, you have been ushered into the performance. There are smells you did not expect. Warm bread from a nearby bakery mingles with the sharp tang of coal. The dampness of washed linens hung above you like drooping clouds, and the faint sourness of last night's refuse. The scents combine into something neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but unmistakably London. Dense, layered, and strangely intimate. You inhale and it settles into you like a reluctant acquaintance. Your boots begin to carry the city with them. Mud, soot, and something darker cling to the seams as though determined to accompany you. You feel the grime settle over your laces, creeping up the edges of your trousers. No amount of careful stepping spares you. The streets have rules, and one of them is that everyone must wear a trace of their passage. You notice how the others accept this without a second thought. The dust on their boots appears less like filth and more like an emblem, a sign that they have been moulded by this place. The lanes twist gradually, drawing you past thin doorways, shuttered shops, and windows fogged from the inside by unseen lives. On occasion, you catch the faint silhouette of someone moving behind the glass, swift, guarded movements, as if residents understand that too much curiosity invites complications. The city watches you in glances stolen between curtains, the way pedestrians in a church might observe a stranger without ever turning their heads. One of the boys gestures subtly toward a particular stretch of pavement, guiding you into a single-file line. You follow without question. The habit of obedience has begun to anchor itself, not through fear, but through the weary allure of simplicity. It is easier to follow than to stand out. It is easier to mirror the group than to test their unspoken boundaries. The streets encourage this kind of submission. Their narrowness nudges you closer. Their irregular curbs force your feet into paths already laid down by countless others. You notice how the boys greet the residents. A nod here, a delicate lift of the chin there. Nothing extravagant, everything measured. Their greetings resemble scripted lines in a play whose story unfolds slowly across generations. You mimic the gestures, careful to replicate the exact degree of politeness. In return, the residents offer expressions that are neither warm nor cold, merely expectant. This is a neighbourhood that knows its rules and finds comfort in the consistency of ritual. The territory is not glamorous. It is not even particularly menacing. What it offers instead is an oppressive steadiness. The lanes are narrow, not only in physical size, but in personality. They allow only certain kinds of movement, certain ways of existing. You feel the limits closing around you, not cruelly but steadily, the way a coat becomes too tight as you grow. The boys speak occasionally, their words drifting into the morning air like thin ribbons of smoke. They comment on mundane things, the delivery boy, who always arrives late, the tenant whose laundry never dries properly, the merchant who insists on wearing gloves year-round. It is all so ordinary that it becomes uncanny. You sense the expectations settling around you, filling the spaces between your ribs. The territory is not ruled through dominance, but through repetition. Day after day of small, precise rituals that accumulate until they press against your sense of self. You begin to understand why these boys cling to their routines with such quiet devotion. The territory demands it, and in return, it offers a strange kind of security, like a cage lined with velvet. A breeze slips between the buildings, carrying with it the faint groan of a ship's horn from the distant docks. The sound lingers in the air, heavy and resonant, and for a moment the entire street seems to breathe with it. The sighs of the city follow you as you move onward, each exhale a reminder that you are walking deeper into something you can no longer define clearly. You glance down another alley and see the shape of a lone street lamp leaning slightly to one side, as though exhausted by the weight of years. Beneath it lies the faint outline of chalk markings, circles, slashes, symbols that mean nothing to you. One of the boys snaps his gaze toward them, his expression tightening for the briefest moment. He gives a subtle shake of his head, guiding your attention away. You comply instinctively. That obedience comes too naturally. You continue walking, and the streets shift once again. What first appeared like a simple neighbourhood now feels like a labyrinth, one designed not to deceive but to absorb. The lanes draw you inward, deeper, urging you to become part of their pattern. Every step you take presses further into a routine that predates you and will outlast you. And as the city sighs beneath your feet, you feel the weight of it settling into the hollow of your chest. You came here seeking a place to belong. Instead, you find yourself moving through a territory that asks for more than belonging. It asks for surrender, piece by quiet piece. The streets grow wider as the morning unfolds, as though stepping aside to let the gang carry out whatever duties the day demands. You sense the quiet shift in the group's attention, something subtle, like the tightening of a glove or the straightening of a lapel. Their pace adjusts, no longer wandering, but drifting purposefully toward the work that keeps their little world from unraveling. No one announces the tasks aloud. There is no schedule printed neatly on a ledger, no bell tolling to summon you. Instead, the obligations appear the way London fog appears, slowly, gently, and with an authority that never asks permission. One of the boys hands you a folded slip of paper, pressed between his fingers as delicately as if it were a calling card. "A small errand," he murmurs. The softness of his tone makes the instructions seem harmless, the way a lullaby disguises its rhythm beneath melody. When you open the paper, the message on it is simple. An address, a name, a reminder to speak politely. You are expected to deliver it without delay, but he smiles as though giving you the freedom to wander. That smile masks the firmness beneath. You know instantly that the freedom is an illusion. As you move through the neighbourhood, you begin to witness the shape of the gang's daily rituals. Every duty is wrapped in gentility. Every expectation is presented with a courtesy that refuses to lift its mask, even when the demands themselves grow heavier. You trail behind one of the older boys as he approaches a butcher's shop. The door bears the scratches of many years, and the smell of brine and raw meat spills onto the street with a strange warmth. Inside, the butcher greets him with forced cheer, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Their exchange is cordial, too cordial, each sentence dipped in honey, each smile stretched over tension like parchment pulled taut. The boy inquires about a debt with the same tone one might use to ask after someone's elderly aunt. The butcher agrees to pay. He laughs, though it sounds more like surrender than amusement. You don't see coins exchanged, only the agreement. And yet the boy leaves with the quiet triumph of someone who has collected something of value. You realise that politeness is their method of extraction. Courtesy, for them, is not merely a social grace, but a tool sharpened to a fine edge. You continue on, guided through a series of duties that vary in appearance, but not in intention. A message is delivered here, a reminder there. A shopkeeper receives a courteous knock on the door before being gently scolded for ignoring an earlier arrangement. A tenant is offered help carrying coal, the gesture so considerate that one might forget the expectation attached to it. Every action blurs the line between assistance and pressure. The boys perform these tasks with almost ceremonial ease. Their movements are choreographed by custom. Their expressions remain calm and finely managed. The brutality of their demands is softened by their civility, but only the surface is smooth. Beneath it, there is the unmistakable weight of insistence. You watch how each resident responds. A nod too shallow, a smile too delayed, a hesitation too long, and how the boys adjust their tone when the response displeases them. The lessons seep into you quietly. You learn to observe without staring. You learn to correct someone with a word so gentle it hardly feels like correction. And when you sense someone's reluctance, you feel the faint pressure of expectation settle on your own shoulders. The pressure to maintain the gang's polished reputation, to preserve the illusion of mutual respect, even when the respect is not mutual at all. The errand you are given leads you to a narrow row of houses, leaning together like old men seeking warmth. You approach the one marked on the slip of paper. Its front steps sag, its windows bow inward beneath the weight of grime, and a thin smoke curls lazily from the chimney. You knock, remembering the way the others greeted residents. Knuckles soft, patient, never hurried. A woman opens the door. Her eyes dart to the paper you hold, then to your face. You watch the subtle shift of her mouth. The moment she recognizes the message, not as communication, but as obligation. Still she maintains her composure, smoothing her apron with trembling fingers. She thanks you for bringing the note. You thank her for receiving it. Both of you speak as though standing in a genteel parlour, not on a cold doorstep where pressure seeps through every syllable. When she closes the door, you hear the faint rattle of items being hastily rearranged. Perhaps coins, perhaps something else. The sound lingers with you. It is the soft noise of someone trying to stay in good standing with people who insist they are only trying to help. You rejoin the boys after your task is done. They greet you with approving nods that resemble encouragement but feel more like assessment. With them, approval is bestowed lightly, but expectation is constant. A single nod from the oldest boy feels like a ribbon tied around your wrist, gentle but binding. As the morning stretches into afternoon, the tasks become less individual and more communal. You find yourself carrying bundles of supplies alongside the others, coal sacks, crates, parcels whose contents you recognize only by weight. Every item is delivered to someone in the neighborhood with an air of unasked generosity. To keep things running smoothly, one boy says, lifting his parcel with impeccable posture. To maintain goodwill, offers another. The phrasing is pleasant. The meaning beneath is unmistakable. Those who receive the parcels offer thanks as dutifully as parishioners reciting prayer. They know what the gestures mean. You sense something resigned in the way they utter their gratitude. Not fear, not anger, just a kind of weary acceptance, as though the arrangement has worn grooves into their routine. The gang's chores, you learn, are less about labour and more about visibility. They maintain a presence that is never loud but always felt. A sweeping of a doorway, a delivery of coal, a quiet conversation with a landlord. Each act reinforces the gang's position in the community, threading them deeper into the daily lives of the people who live here. The soft brutality of these duties lies not in violence, but in their constancy. They tighten around you, the way ivy wraps around a railing, slow, patient, unyielding. By the time you recognize how much time has passed, the day has pressed itself into your bones. You feel the weight of the errands, the expectations, the smiles that never quite reach the eyes. The boys continue working with unbroken calm. Their politeness does not falter, even when the tasks turn unpleasant. A landlord refusing to negotiate becomes the target of a conversation delivered with immaculate courtesy and iron insistence. A drunken patron shouting in the street is escorted away with such gentlemanly composure that he bows in apology, despite not remembering what he is apologizing for. Every small act reinforces the same truth. They preserve order, but only the order that benefits them. Their ways are tidy, their grip is not. As you watch them, you feel something settle inside you, a realization as slow as dusk creeping across the sky. This life is not about camaraderie or excitement. It is about maintenance, constant, quiet maintenance. The duties will not lessen. The expectations will not soften. The smiles will never be as warm as they appear. You sense the cost of belonging here, not money, not loyalty, but the gradual surrender of your own rhythm. You move when they move. You speak when they speak. You offer politeness even when the air between you and another person feels weighted with something unsaid. The day winds itself down with the softness of a curtain being drawn, and you walk with the boys as they finish their final rounds. The streets are quieter now, emptied of the morning bustle, and the lamps have begun to glow with the faint amber that signals evening's approach. You feel the chill rising from the paving stones, curling around your ankles. In that quiet, you finally understand how the gang keeps its hold, through a civility so carefully performed that it becomes indistinguishable from authority. Through kindness that feels like a promise and also like a leash. Through chores that seem small until you realize how they root you in place. And as you walk, the cost of polite company settles into your awareness, gentle, unassuming, and unshakable. Evening settles across the neighborhood with a kind of deliberate slowness, as though the city is reluctant to release what little warmth remains in its stones. The lamps blink awake one by one, their lights spreading in gentle circles that tremble each time a breeze drifts past. You walk with the others through this dim amber glow, feeling the quiet shift in the air, the way the daylight duties fade and a different rhythm begins to take their place. The streets do not grow louder, they grow thinner, stretched into long corridors of shadow that invite your gaze to wander and warn you not to linger too long. The boys move with the same careful grace they've shown all day, but something in their posture shifts. Their shoulders angle slightly inward, their attention sharpens, their footsteps fall with the subtle precision of people who know they are no longer simply being watched by neighbours behind curtains, but by something more diffuse and unpredictable. It doesn't need to be explained. You feel it spreading through you, the unspoken instruction. Awareness here is not an act, it is a necessity. A soft voice beside you, a boy with dark curls and a manner so gentle it almost masks the severity of his lessons, offers a simple reminder: the street has ears, best to walk as though it does. His tone is sweet enough to pass for reassurance, yet the implication hangs behind the words, like a shadow that chooses its shape. You glance around instinctively, though you've been taught already not to make the motion too obvious. The trick, they tell you, is to observe without betraying the effort. You learn to tilt your head, as though admiring a lamppost, while checking whether footsteps follow. You learn to adjust your stride, so you can listen more clearly to the rhythm of another's pace. You learn to let your eyes sweep corners lightly, as if simply taking in the architecture rather than mapping potential danger. The streets encourage this hyper-awareness. It is woven into the way sound travels here. The echo of boots hitting uneven stones, the hush of wind moving between buildings, the sudden silence of a passerby who chooses not to engage. Each noise becomes an alert, each absence a possible sign. The boys teach you with gestures rather than orders. A hand resting too close to a coat pocket may signal readiness. A pause at an intersection might indicate unseen company ahead. A glance upward can warn you that a window above is open in a way that suggests someone is listening. And through it all, their voices remain calm. Instruction arrives like a bedtime story, soft, steady, deceptively soothing. Notice the shadows along the brick, one murmurs, guiding your gaze without lifting his own. They will tell you who arrived before you. You begin to see what he means. The city holds impressions that only reveal themselves when you slow your breathing enough. A scuff in the dirt that does not match the shape of your group's boots. A loose stone that has been disturbed recently. A faint indentation along a windowsill where someone rested an arm to watch unnoticed. None of this frightens the boys. It barely stirs their composure. They treat vigilance the way one treats posture, essential, expected, invisible when mastered. You feel the practice seeping into your muscles as naturally as fatigue. Watchfulness becomes something your body learns almost without your permission. As the evening deepens, you follow the group to a quieter stretch of road, where houses sit pressed so closely together they seem to huddle against the cold. A cat slips across your path, pausing to regard you with unblinking suspicion before vanishing beneath a porch. The boys halt without speaking, their attention fixed on a faint movement at the far end of the street. You see nothing at first. Then, barely, someone turns a corner too quickly, coat trailing behind like a nervous whisper. Too hurried, one boy murmurs. People who belong don't rush. They continue walking, not to confront the person, not even to follow, simply to remain present. Their presence is itself a message. You understand now that much of their world functions this way, through subtle demonstrations rather than dramatic declarations. Their steps, their posture, the pace of their breathing, all are part of an unspoken language of control. You feel yourself adjusting unconsciously, matching their steadiness. Your awareness sharpens with each passing minute. A lantern flickers in the window of a modest brick house as someone inside leans back, retreating from view. You would not have noticed hours ago, but now the motion feels glaring. You register it without changing expression. That is another lesson. Your face must remain still even when your mind is racing. They lead you through alleys that feel different at night. The daytime grime becomes a darker sheen, reflecting lamp flames in broken fragments. The sounds grow more distinct, the soft scrape of fabric against brick, the muffled thud of boots hitting a wooden stair, the faint rustle of newspapers abandoned against iron railings. You hear conversations carried on whisper currents, as though the city itself is murmuring all its secrets at once. It is here, in these narrow night passages, that you begin to understand the true cost of vigilance. It steals subtly, it quiets you, it asks that part of your mind remain awake long after the rest of you wishes to sleep. The boys do not seem burdened by it. They wear their alertness like an accessory, a neat tie pinned just so, a collar folded at the perfect angle. But you feel the weight more plainly. Your shoulders tighten, your breath shallows, your heart keeps the rhythm of the street's tension. When a drunkard stumbles into view, singing a slurred melody, the boys shift with elegant precision. They do not confront him. They simply form a subtle barrier, their bodies arranged to guide him away, all while maintaining an air of disinterest. He lurches past without ever realizing he was rerouted. The gang continues forward, as though adjusting a piece on a board. You learn that danger rarely announces itself loudly. It slips in quietly, wearing familiar faces, strolling along ordinary paths. That is why they teach you to watch everything, not with fear, but with endurance. A vigilance so constant it transforms into habit. You pass a small courtyard where laundry hangs limp beneath the nighttime air. A woman stands in the shadows, arms crossed in front of her apron, eyeing the group with a wary sort of respect. She nods. The boys nod back, their politeness tidy, yet loaded with meaning. You sense the exchange carries a history you have not been told, and perhaps never will be. Every interaction appears routine, yet each one reinforces the necessity of being alert. You feel as though you are walking through a web, one spun by expectations, responsibilities, and invisible threads connecting people who do not speak the full truth aloud. The night grows colder, your senses grow sharper. It is no longer a deliberate effort. It has become instinct, listening for footsteps that do not match your group's rhythm, watching for the lift of a curtain, sensing hesitation in a stranger's stride. Even when you stop with the boys beside a small bridge to rest briefly, your eyes continue to scan the darkened water flowing beneath. You see how the reflections ripple, distorting the lantern glow. Each distortion stirs a fleeting thought. Was that movement natural? Or was someone watching from below? No one tells you to check. Your mind does it on its own. The soothing tones in which the gang teaches their vigilance only deepen the uncanny effect. Lessons given in whispers blend into your memory like lullabies turned inside out. The gentleness of their instruction almost makes the anxiety worse, because it suggests that this state of alertness is something they expect will comfort you eventually. It will not. As the group finally crosses into another street, one lined with iron fences and tidy hedges, you feel the exhaustion of watchfulness settle inside you with an intimate heaviness. It is the kind of weariness that clings long after your body finds a bed. You know that even when you lie down, your mind will continue listening for footsteps, rehearsing the motions of awareness, checking the shadows behind your eyelids. The boys speak quietly among themselves as they walk, but you catch only fragments. Their tone remains soft, their manner remains polite, yet their conversation hums with the certainty of people who understand that vigilance is not a skill but a lifestyle. You fall into step with them, guided less by instruction now and more by necessity. Awareness curls itself into the corners of your mind, a constant companion you never invited but cannot dismiss. And as you walk deeper into the quiet night, you realize you have learned a new habit, one that will follow you into sleep, one that will greet you the moment you wake, one that will linger behind every gentle smile the gang offers you. Looking over your shoulder has become part of who you are now, a silent practice, a nightly ritual, a reminder that safety here is a performance you must play your part in. By the time the group guides you indoors, the night air has settled deep into your coat, clinging to the fabric with a chill that feels reluctant to leave. You step into a narrow doorway without being asked, following the thread of movement as naturally as breathing, and find yourself in a dim kitchen lit by a single oil lamp whose glow barely reaches the corners of the room. The warmth from the small kettle on the stove attempts to soften the atmosphere, though its gentle hiss seems overwhelmed by the stern quiet of the place. The kitchen looks older than the boys who fill it, older than their routines, older even than the chipped wooden table that occupies the centre like a tired anchor. Everything has a worn reliability, shelves bowed under the weight of mismatched crockery, a loaf of bread sitting in a cloth as frayed as the apron hanging beside the stove, a tin jar of loose-leaf tea dented from years of use. These objects do not feel lived in so much as endured, relics of a household maintained with discipline rather than affection. One of the boys gestures for you to sit, and the motion carries the smooth assurance of someone offering a seat in a private club, even though the chair itself wobbles faintly as you settle into it. The others move about the kitchen with a kind of synchronized quiet, each step measured, each clink of ceramic controlled. Their gentleness is not warm, it is practiced, ritualistic, as if noise itself might be seen as impropriety. A pot of tea is placed on the table, followed by a plate of toast, burnt at the edges but sliced into precise, evenly measured rectangles. Someone spreads butter with the calm exactness of a surgeon preparing a tool. The boys sit down around you, forming a circle that feels almost ceremonial. The youngest folds his hands in front of him as though preparing for prayer. Another straightens his posture to the point of discomfort. Their faces remain pleasant, untouched by the heaviness that hangs in the room. One of the older boys pours your tea. He does not ask how you prefer it. He simply adds the amount of milk he believes appropriate, stirring it with a quiet, deliberate motion that seems more evaluative than generous. When he slides the cup toward you, You feel as though you have been handed both a drink and a test. The first sip is warm enough to chase a bit of the cold from your throat, though the relief is fleeting. The moment your cup returns to the table, the softest shift passes through the boys seated around you. A subtle straightening, a faint sharpening of their expressions. The same way a congregation might ready itself for a sermon. They begin speaking not all at once, but in turn, with a politeness that feels almost suffocating. Each boy takes a moment to offer a reminder, a guideline, a gentle clarification of your role within their company. The instructions are phrased with such warmth that their meaning lands softly, but the weight behind them remains unmistakable. "You'll find we value reliability," one says, slicing his toast with surgical neatness. "Consistency," adds another, buttering his slice with a calm so precise it borders on performance, a certain steadiness of conduct. "You don't need to be remarkable," assures the boy across from you, a comforting sentiment on the surface, though something in his gaze suggests that failure to conform would indeed be remarkable, and not in the way anyone desires. Each reminder is delivered with a smile, each expectation wrapped in the softness of genteel phrasing. Yet the atmosphere presses in like a velvet-lined vice. You realize that the kitchen silence is not the comfortable quiet of friends sharing a meal, but the attentive hush of authority, disguised as hospitality. Every bite of toast feels like a small negotiation. While you chew, the kettle releases another sigh of steam, and its warmth grazes your cheek. It should be comforting, but instead it feels like a reminder. The heat in the room comes from a controlled flame, tended and sanctioned by those around you. Even the warmth is conditional here. The conversations shift to the day's tasks, mentioned with the tidy satisfaction of men who have completed their obligations. Nothing is discussed loudly. Every accomplishment is understated, treated with modesty that feels oddly theatrical. They speak of interactions with shopkeepers, adjustments made to certain arrangements, the quieting of a dispute between neighbours. The way they describe these things smooths over the tension beneath them, as if every unsettling act can be softened by the right choice of phrasing. A boy beside you breaks his toast into two identical halves, glancing at you with a serene expression. "People feel safer," he says gently, though he does not specify who he means by people, nor from what they feel safe. His tone implies that you are now part of the machinery, keeping that safety in place. Whether you intended to join it or not seems no longer relevant. Another boy taps the rim of his teacup lightly before speaking. "We don't ask for much," he says, even though you already sense the magnitude of what they ask for. Your time, your awareness, your willingness to perform the role they have quietly assigned to you. Their civility remains impeccable, but something cold pulses beneath it. You feel it each time a sentence begins too slowly or ends with a softness that feels rehearsed. You sense it in the way their eyes linger, just long enough to remind you that you are being measured. Someone offers you more toast. You accept because refusal feels like an offence, though the butter has gone grainy and the bread crumbles dryly against your tongue. You swallow it nevertheless, swallowing also the notion that meals here are meant for comfort. They are instead small ceremonies meant to keep everyone aligned, politeness as structure, routine as discipline. The kitchen grows warmer as the tea steams beneath your chin. The condensation fogs the nearby window, blurring the outlines of the street lamp outside. Shadows shift behind the glass, indistinct figures passing through the night. You realize how thin the walls are, how easily your table's quiet rituals could be overheard by someone taking too great an interest. Yet the boys seem unconcerned. Their calmness suggests ownership, as though the neighbourhood itself knows to keep its distance. One boy leans back, folding his hands loosely. "Comfort," he says, "comes from predictability." The phrase is gentle, even philosophical, but its meaning curls inward, sharp as a needle. Predictability here is not offered, it is demanded. Someone else lifts the kettle, topping off your cup before you can decide whether you want more. The act is courteous, precise, and subtly commanding. You wrap your hands around the warm mug, aware that even this simple gesture makes you look more settled, more compliant, more part of the picture they wish to maintain. The conversation drifts, but the expectations remain steady. You learn how disagreements are resolved, not with shouting, but with quiet conversations held in kitchens like this one, where tone is more important than volume, and a single raised brow carries more force than a clenched fist. The boys describe these methods with such grace that you almost miss the underlying threat. Their calm voices carry no menace, but their words make it clear that conflict is smoothed over in ways that leave no room for resistance. The iron grip never announces itself, it simply tightens politely. A boy across the table refills his tea, smiling softly as he adjusts the angle of his spoon. "We take care of our own," he says, a phrase that could be comforting if not spoken with such perfect balance, half promise, half warning. And with every sip you take, the kitchen grows smaller. Not physically, but in the way expectations wrap themselves around the space. You feel how this room functions, not as a refuge, but as a chamber of gentle instruction. Even the warmth begins to feel curated, rationed, controlled. The heat from the kettle may soften the chill in the air, but it cannot soften the rules embedded in every gesture. You sense how this household, this table, this ritual has shaped the boys into the men they are, and how it has begun, subtly, to shape you as well. As the meal wanes and the last crumbs disappear from the plate, a comfortable silence settles over the group. Yet the comfort is deceptive. Beneath it lies the quiet tension that accompanies a pact, whether spoken or implied. The boys stand with the same fluid coordination you've witnessed all day, collecting dishes, wiping crumbs, straightening chairs. Their motions suggest finality, but also expectation. You rise with them, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. The kettle gives one last hiss, as though exhaling its approval or disapproval. You cannot tell which. And as you leave the dim kitchen, guided once more by their practiced composure, you carry with you the unmistakable understanding that even the simplest gatherings here are part of something larger, a schooling in obedience, a ritual of hierarchy, a reminder that warmth and threat can be poured from the same teapot. Morning returns with a thin, watery light that seeps reluctantly through the curtains of the house where the gang gathers. The faint warmth of the kitchen still lingers on your clothes, though it has already begun to fade, leaving behind only the imprint of expectation. You step outside with the others into streets that still hold the damp memory of dawn, and the group disperses with the quiet purpose of people who do not need to be told what comes next. Your place among them is neither questioned nor celebrated. It is simply assumed, absorbed into the rhythm of the day. You follow that rhythm because doing otherwise would feel like stepping out of line during a formal march. Noticeable, disruptive, and strangely discourteous. Tasks emerge with the same softness as steam from a kettle. One boy hands you a folded note for delivery. Another nods toward a shop whose door requires knocking. A third offers a brief explanation of the route you should take. No one frames these responsibilities as tests or obligations. They are woven into the fabric of belonging, as if every small job were part of a social dance whose steps must be learned not through instruction, but through imitation. Your first errand leads you toward a row of storefronts that appear more tired than open. The windows hold smudges not from fingerprints, but from years of breath pressing against the glass. Shopkeepers watching the world pass without ever fully joining it. When you enter the cobbler's shop, the sole worker glances up with the resigned politeness of someone who has long understood his place in this quiet hierarchy. You deliver the message. He reads it without comment, his eyes dipping only once toward the small pouch of coins he quietly retrieves from beneath the counter. When he hands it to you, he does so with a courteous nod, as though the exchange were merely the completion of a neighbourly agreement rather than a transaction shaped by invisible pressure. No voices are raised, no threats are implied, yet you feel something tighten subtly in the air, a gentle tension like the faint stretch of a string, drawn taut but not plucked. As you leave the shop, you understand one of the gang's unwritten rules. Tasks are not meant to be dramatic. They are meant to be absorbed into the texture of everyday life until the lines between ordinary courtesy and coercion blur into something indistinguishable. Your next job involves collecting a payment from a resident who lives above a printmaker's shop. The staircase creaks beneath your weight, the sound drawn out and brittle, as though the wood itself resents the disturbance. When the tenant opens the door, he smiles politely, though the gesture is stiff around the edges. You recognize it as the kind of smile people offer when they understand the consequences of refusal, but wish, with some distant part of themselves, that they did not. He invites you in for a moment, another courtesy layered atop discomfort, and retrieves a coin box from the mantel. While he counts out the predetermined sum, you notice the meticulous arrangement of his home. Books aligned with obsessive precision, a coat hung perfectly on its peg, the table cleared of anything that might suggest disorder. The neatness feels not like pride but like survival. When he hands you the payment, the weight of it in your palm feels oddly symbolic, as though you are holding not currency, but the remnants of someone's carefully managed compliance. He thanks you again, voice steady but thin, and closes the door with a gentleness that suggests he hopes the sound will not linger in memory. You descend the stairs with the knowledge that politeness has acted as both shield and leash for the man inside. It is the same civility the gang uses as currency, an unspoken contract that keeps resistance quiet and expectations intact. The boys do not ask whether the tasks unsettle you. They assume you understand, or will. You walk alongside them once more, absorbing the delicate choreography of their routines. Their calm composure never cracks, even when the jobs shift in nature. Not all tasks involve coins or messages. Some involve presence. You are guided to stand beside a doorway, while two of the boys speak with a baker who appears increasingly flustered. They speak softly, voices rising and falling in respectful cadence, while the baker wrings his hands as though kneading dough from air. Your presence is part of the performance, an element of respectable menace, as one boy called it earlier with a soft chuckle. You are not threatening him. You are simply there, positioned at the right angle, wearing an expression that implies patience but makes clear you are not there by accident. The baker agrees to something. You are not told what. The boys thank him lightly, almost affectionately, and you all step back into the street. The encounter has left no raised voices, no visible hostility, only a lingering sense that something has shifted and will not shift back. Each task teaches you another layer of the gang's methods. Their world is built not on dramatic acts, but on subtle impositions, each one wrapped in refinement. You begin to understand how civility becomes a suffocating cloak. Warm at first, then heavy, then impossible to remove without tearing seams you never saw stitched. A message must be delivered to a warehouse near the river, so you walk alone for the first time that day, the cobblestones beneath your boots carrying the faint remnants of industrial grime. The smell of the river, sharp, cold, metallic, tightens the air around you. Dock workers glance your way, some with curiosity, others with recognition that seems disproportionate to your presence, as though they've seen many young men walking with the same careful gait, bearing envelopes with the same unspoken authority. Inside the warehouse office, a man with ink-stained fingers accepts your message, folding the paper with the precision of someone who has folded many just like it. He offers no complaint, only nods and a hollow, "Very well," before retreating into the dimness of the interior. You wonder whether he has learned over time that resistance is rarely worthwhile when the demands come dressed in politeness. You leave the river behind and return to the neighborhood, your feet tracing paths that now feel strangely familiar. The boys greet you without ceremony, acknowledging your completion of the task with brief glances of approval that hold more expectation than praise. They redirect you toward another errand, their movements as fluid and steady as the flow of the city around you. One job stands out for its peculiar gentleness. You accompany two boys to deliver a parcel of firewood to an elderly woman whose stove is failing. She welcomes you with weary gratitude, her smile genuine but tempered by something like worry. The boys arrange the logs neatly beside her hearth, offering charming reassurances that she will stay warm through the night. Their words are kind, their eyes linger, just a moment too long. You sense the implicit agreement. Warmth is provided now. Cooperation is expected later. It is in these quiet moments that the suffocation becomes most apparent. The tasks themselves are mundane, even helpful, but each one carries an invisible string that binds the community to the gang's steady hand, and binds you to the group through the simple, irreversible act of participating. As the day continues, your role becomes clearer. You are not simply completing chores. You are being taught how to exist within this structure, how to move, how to behave, how to cultivate an air of refined authority that masks the weight of your presence. The boys praise your composure with soft words, but every syllable feels like another stitch in a garment you did not realize you were wearing. Evening approaches slowly, dragging long shadows across the buildings. The lamps flicker awake once more, and you walk through the neighborhood with the sensation that the light itself is watching you. The boys disperse, heading toward familiar corners and customary doorsteps, their tasks continuing in the measured silence of dusk. You pause for a moment beneath a lamppost, feeling the city settle around you. The air is cool, tinged with coal and river mist. You feel the fatigue in your shoulders, not from exertion, but from the quiet tension that has accompanied you all day. In the gentle haze of the evening light, the realization unfolds softly within you. Earning your keep here is less about effort and more about surrender, not of loyalty, but of autonomy. Not all at once, but inch by inch, through errands disguised as courtesy. Each polite task has pressed you deeper into the gang's structure, shaping your place with invisible hands. And as you stand beneath the lamp's faint glow, you feel the subtle, suffocating truth settle upon you like dust. This life demands obedience wrapped in gentility, and you have already begun to comply. Night takes its time settling across the city, as though reluctant to claim the streets that daylight failed to brighten. When the last traces of evening drain from the sky, the darkness that arrives feels less like an absence of light and more like a thickening of the air itself. Coal smoke rises from chimneys in long, mournful ribbons, and the lamps lining the roads glow with a soft, amber weakness, like fading embers fighting to stay alive. You walk beneath those lamps with a quiet, steady pace, matching the rhythm the others have taught you. Their footsteps guide you, though no words are exchanged. Evening duties unfold with the same hushed precision as everything else in this world. Nothing hurried, nothing loud, everything wrapped in a politeness that somehow makes the weight of the night feel heavier. The lamps cast long shadows that stretch across the cobblestones in slow, theatrical sweeps. They move when you move, following you with an almost courteous persistence. Yet there is something unsettling in their shape, too elongated, too eager to keep pace, as if they bow politely only to lunge forward when you're not watching. Each time you glance behind you, the shadows appear to lean just slightly closer, as though they have been waiting for your attention. You turn corners the way you've been taught, gradually, with your head angled so you can catch the faintest hint of movement ahead. The streets at night feel different from their daylight versions. They breathe differently too, whispering in drafts that slip between gaps in the bricks, humming under the doorways of unattended shops, rustling lightly along windowsills where curtains have been drawn tight. London at night is not louder, it is more alert, and you must be as well. The tasks assigned to you this evening are simple on the surface. Check that certain shops have closed properly, ensure that no disturbances rise in the lanes the gang considers its own, deliver a few unmarked parcels with an air of ordinary intention. But beneath these actions lies the city's nocturnal pulse, uneven, fragile, and always ready to quicken when provoked. A soft-tongued boy with sandy hair walks beside you for the first route. He moves with the relaxed posture of someone who understands that the night is only dangerous if you give it reason to be. "Watch the windows," he murmurs gently, his voice scarcely louder than the rustle of his coat. "They notice more than you'd think." You do as he suggests. You always do. Every few houses, a pale face hovers behind glass for a moment before slipping back into darkness. The watchers are not hostile. Most are simply curious. Curiosity disguised as caution. But their presence reminds you that these lanes are never entirely empty, even when they appear deserted. Someone is always listening. Someone is always measuring your steps, your posture, your intentions. And so you carry yourself the way the gang expects. Polite, composed, unthreatening, but unmistakably deliberate. The boy beside you stops at a seamstress's door, checking that the lock sits properly in its metal slot. He does not touch it long, only enough to ensure order is maintained. His calm expression does not change. You realize that his serenity isn't natural. It is cultivated, shaped by countless nights like this one. Nights where fear cannot be allowed to disturb the delicate structure of authority. As you continue down the street, the lamps flicker overhead. The light contracts momentarily, casting the entire lane into a dim wash of grey. During that blink of near darkness, the shadows seem to rearrange themselves, tilting into shapes that you briefly imagine could step forward. But the lamps recover, glowing once more with that exhausted, stubborn light, and the shadows retreat into their polite formations. You feel your breath grow shallow, though no one has threatened you. The night does not need to shout. Its quietness alone insists on your obedience. The boy eventually peels away to complete his own tasks, leaving you to walk alone for a stretch. The solitude deepens the heaviness around you. The soft echo of your boots on the stones feels amplified, as though each step announces your presence in a city that would prefer you tread more lightly than humanly possible. You pass a row of warehouses near the water's edge. Their windows are dark, but their doors bear marks of constant use. Scratches, dents, streaks of dirt that reflect faint pieces of lamplight. A stray dog lifts its head from a pile of discarded burlap, watching you with eyes that seem to understand more of the night's tension than any person ever could. It does not bark, it simply observes, then lowers its head again, as though nothing you could do would surprise it. When you deliver a small parcel to the back entrance of a tavern, the door opens only a sliver. A large hand extends, takes the bundle, and vanishes without a word. The door shuts with such careful quiet that the sound feels like a gesture of respect, though you sense it has nothing to do with you personally. These exchanges are part of the nocturnal etiquette, silent, swift, transactional, and bound by long-standing arrangements you're only beginning to understand. Your presence is the reinforcement, your silence is the signal. Another lamp flickers, another shadow stretches. Your heartbeat syncs with the rhythm of the dim glow. As you continue through the streets, the night air thickens with coal smoke, dense enough to coat your throat with a faint bitterness. The smoke drifts in layers, polite enough to conceal itself in the darkness, but bold enough to remind you that it is always there, inhaled with every breath you take. You cough softly, though you try to hide it, not wanting to break the composure expected of you. The discomfort is mild, but it settles inside you like a long-term tenant. A distant carriage rattles along a broader road, its wheels clattering in a steady staccato. Horses snort in irritation at the cold, their breath shimmering like ghosts rising from the ground. The sound fades as the carriage disappears, swallowed by a fog bank that has begun to unfurl along the street. It creeps in slowly, a pale veil that softens every outline, yet somehow sharpens your vigilance. Fog at night makes everything seem closer than it is. The walls, the lamps, the figures passing by. You catch sight of a man walking toward you, hat pulled low, coat wrapped tightly around his frame. His gait is steady but cautious. As he approaches, he nods with impeccable politeness, the kind that avoids offence by avoiding any real engagement. You return the gesture. The interaction is brief, but your spine stays rigid until he has disappeared into the haze. You never know which passers-by belong to the city's neutral middle ground and which harbour connections that might tangle with your own. The boys were right. Vigilance becomes habit long before it becomes skill. A quiet alley leads you back toward one of the gang's usual meeting points, a small courtyard with a crooked fountain whose water trickles endlessly, though no one remembers when it was last repaired. The courtyard is empty now, but you feel the memory of presence lingering in the stones, the impression of footsteps, the faint scent of old tobacco, the sense of voices that once murmured instructions here. You pause beside the fountain, listening to the water's weak, uneven rhythm. It matches the fatigue in your bones, the heaviness that seems to have settled more firmly with each errand completed, each street crossed, each shadow interpreted. Even the simplest tasks grow weightier at night. Your body longs for rest, but your mind remains stretched thin beneath the city's unblinking gaze. London does not sleep, not truly. And while you walk its midnight corridors, neither can you. You continue moving because stillness feels too vulnerable. The lamps guide you with their dim halos, flickering as though reminding you of the fragility of your borrowed role in these streets. The rituals of night, deliveries, observations, unspoken reassurances, blend together until they form a pattern that holds you as tightly as any rope. Your steps eventually lead you back toward the house where the boys gather. A faint glow spills from one of the lower windows, outlining the doorway like a quiet invitation. You approach, not with relief, but with the weary acceptance of someone who knows the night has left its imprint on him, pressed like soot into the seams of his coat. When you step inside, the warmth of the interior feels muted, as though filtered through the memory of cold air and gaslight. You realize how much of yourself you left out in the lamplit streets, how watchfulness has followed you indoors, settling under your skin like a lingering shiver. The candles flicker softly as the door closes behind you, and in that flicker, you understand why these nights will never truly let you rest. London stays awake around you. Shadows bow and threaten in the same breath, and every step you take deepens your place in a world that mistakes vigilance for belonging. Sleep may come eventually, but peace never does. The warmth of the house wraps around you just long enough to soften the chill clinging to your coat, but it does little to quiet the restlessness that has settled beneath your skin. Evening's errands still echo faintly in your bones, and the memory of lamplit streets feels stitched into your sleeves. When you step into the back room, where a few of the older members gather around a small hearth, you sense immediately that the night has one more lesson to offer, one delivered not through tasks but through words shaped with careful precision. The room has the air of a parlour that was never meant for comfort. The wallpaper, once a deep green, has faded into muted patches that peel gently at the corners. A modest fire crackles in the grate, emitting more light than heat, and the chairs arranged near it seem chosen more for posture than relaxation. You take a seat because one of the older boys gestures toward an empty chair with polite insistence. His smile is warm, but the invitation carries a subtle weight, as though sitting is itself an act of compliance. 3 of them sit with you, men who are just older enough to speak with a certain authority, yet still young enough to maintain the appearance of youth that Victorian society finds so deceptively trustworthy. They regard you with a calm attentiveness, the kind that signals the beginning of a conversation rather than the continuation of one. One of them leans forward, the firelight softening the sharp lines of his face. "There's something you ought to understand," he says, his tone gentle enough to belong to a tutor correcting a minor mistake. "A reputation is a delicate thing here." The words hover in the air like steam rising from a cup, warm but faintly obscuring everything behind them. Another nods thoughtfully, polishing a cuff button with the side of his thumb. "It doesn't belong solely to you, not anymore." You listen because listening feels expected. It also feels safer than speaking. The room's quiet encourages patience, as though each word that follows will be placed deliberately into the space between breaths. The men speak without raised voices, without urgency. Their calmness is unnerving precisely because it never wavers. The lesson they deliver is shaped as kindly as a bedtime story. yet its content lands with the gentle pressure of something irreversible. Every step you take outside, Warren continues, reflects upon us. Every door you knock on, every errand you complete, every glance you exchange, it all contributes. To what you are becoming, adds another, not unkindly, to how others understand you, and how they understand us. Their voices overlap in a soft rhythm, and you feel yourself sinking slightly into the chair, though not from comfort. Their words settle around you like an invisible layer of fabric, one that wraps without constricting, yet still defines your posture. The fire pops quietly. A stray spark leaps upward before dissolving into the dim air. No one reacts. They are accustomed to the hearth's unpredictability, far more concerned with the subtle shaping of the person sitting before them. They describe reputation the way a craftsman might describe his tools, not as something natural or self-generated, but as something made, shaved down, sanded smooth, adjusted until it fits the mold the group requires. You begin to understand that your reputation is no longer simply a reflection of your behavior. It is a component of their machinery. People watch us, the eldest says, with a serene tilt of his head, far more closely than you might think, and they rely on consistency. It is consistency, you see, that gives them comfort. The word comfort carries an irony so subtle you nearly miss it. The comfort in question is not yours. You're learning the manners, another adds, almost praising. How to move politely, how to speak with restraint, how to show presence without appearing crude. These things matter. It is strange to hear your behavior described as though it were being sculpted from the outside, when you had once believed your mannerisms belonged to you. But the longer you sit here, the more you feel those mannerisms shift, as though aligning themselves with the expectations pressing gently upon your shoulders. They explain, still softly, that reputation is not earned once. It must be maintained constantly, renewed each day through obedience to the group's refined customs. It is a daily polishing of image, a ritual of self-control that leaves no room for improvisation. Even your smallest gestures are now pieces of a larger arrangement. A misstep may not bring punishment, but it will bring disappointment, which in this world feels far heavier. The neighborhood notices everything, one says, adjusting his sleeve. They see whether you bow your head at the right moment, whether your tone suggests courtesy or carelessness. They decide quickly who you are, and we all live with that decision. You realize then that reputation is not a matter of personal pride. It is a shared burden, distributed evenly, whether you asked for it or not. Every expectation placed upon you is framed as a responsibility, not a restriction. Yet you feel the restriction tightening nonetheless, like an invisible collar drawn closer with each polite explanation. They are shaping you, but they deliver this shaping with kindness, as though doing you a favour. The eldest leans back, folding his hands together, with the poise of a scholar preparing to summarise a lecture. You'll find that predictability is prized here, he says. There should be no uncertainty about how you behave. Not for us, not for those who watch. His expression is gentle, almost affectionate, but his eyes leave no room for misunderstanding. Predictability is another word for confinement. The men speak fondly of the reputations they've built, how being seen as reliable allows them access to certain privileges, how being perceived as composed makes difficult talks easier, how appearing courteous reassures both neighbours and adversaries. These advantages are described with modest pride, yet you can hear the demands beneath them. Their reputations do not belong to them, any more than yours will belong to you. They are shared property, polished and guarded like heirlooms, passed down through a lineage of expectation. One of the older members, barely past boyhood himself, offers you a reassuring smile. It becomes easier, he says. You find your pace, your place, and it fits. His words are meant to soothe. Instead, they land with a quiet finality. Fitting in, here, is not an option. It is a requirement. A gust of wind rattles the window panes lightly, making the flame in the hearth bob and stretch. The sound feels like a reminder that the world outside has its own unpredictability, weather that shifts without pattern, nights that deepen without permission. But inside this room, everything is controlled. Even the fire seems expected to behave itself. The men continue their lessons, though the words grow softer, trailing into generalities about dignity, posture, and presentation. Their voices blend with the sounds of the fire, creating a soft, rhythmic lull that feels both calming and constricting. You sense that this conversation has been delivered many times before, to many others who once sat in the same chair, learning the same truths. Bit by bit, the meaning crystallizes. Your reputation is no longer a reflection of your choices, but a reflection of your adherence. A mirror polished not by your hand, but by the hands of those who expect you to maintain its shine. When the conversation finally quiets, no grand declaration marks its end. The men simply rise in near-perfect unison, each smoothing their coat or adjusting a cuff as though resetting themselves back into their nightly routines. The lesson has been given. The expectations have been installed. Nothing more needs to be said. You stand as well, feeling the weight of the room's gentility press lightly against your back. It is not oppressive. It is not aggressive. It is something worse. It is reasonable. And as you leave the parlour behind, walking toward the dimly lit hallway, where shadows fall in neat, obedient lines, a realization settles into your chest with quiet certainty. Belonging here does not mean being accepted for who you are. It means becoming who they need you to be, shaped, trimmed, and polished, until the person you once were becomes nothing more than an unfinished draft. The conversation with the older members lingers in your mind long after you leave the parlour, its softness settling over you like a thin layer of dust. You feel it still as you move through the narrow hallway, passing muted wallpaper and framed sketches of unremarkable landscapes. Decorations chosen not for beauty but for their ability to appear harmless. The house seems to breathe in low, steady rhythms, as if maintaining a facade of calm has become second nature to its walls. When you step outside again, the night has deepened. The lamps burn in pale halos that waver whenever the wind pushes past, and the street glistens faintly with the residue of distant rain. You walk alongside a few of the boys, pulled not by instruction, but by the quiet expectation that your presence should align with theirs. Their posture remains impeccable, even in the darkness. Every collar is straight, every coat buttoned, every pair of boots polished despite the grime waiting beneath each step. It becomes clear that respectability here is not a luxury. It is a mandate. The boys move with a dignity that feels incongruous against the tired backdrop of the neighbourhood. Their clothing may be modest, but it is cared for obsessively. Pressed sleeves, brushed lapels, cuffs that betray not a single wrinkle. They polish their boots daily, sometimes twice, until the leather reflects lamplight like a muted promise. They walk with precision, as though posture alone might shield them from the hardships pressing in from every direction. You catch sight of one boy, pausing beneath a gas lamp to adjust the fall of his coat. His face remains calm, almost serene, but the motion is a hurried one, born of the fear that a crooked seam might betray weakness. The gesture is small, but the meaning behind it is absolute. Appearance is a shield, and letting it slip is not an option. Around you, the neighbourhood wears its poverty with far less ceremony. Cracked windows, crooked chimneys, uneven cobblestones that swallow boot soles whole. Laundry hangs between buildings like surrendered flags, and the silhouettes of residents lean silently behind their curtains. The city itself seems bent, softened by time and hardship, yet the boys walk as though none of it touches them. Their composure is deliberate, constructed to counteract the reality of their environment. Yet the effort required to maintain such decorum reveals a different truth. Respectability here is a performance you must rehearse endlessly. One of the boys slows his pace and glances at your coat, smoothing the front of his own as if silently reminding you to mirror him. You follow his example, straightening your posture even though your shoulders ache from the day's efforts. The street's uneven stones make walking upright feel impossible, but you keep trying. They all do. For them, dignity is not about pride. It is about survival, about proving to the world that they are not defined by the narrow lanes they claim as their territory. As the group rounds a corner, you see a pair of men lingering beside a tavern's entrance. Their jackets hang unevenly, their boots scuffed, their expressions blunt and unrefined. They notice the boys approaching and fall silent, adjusting their stance with an air of reluctant deference. It is not the gang's presence that unsettles them. It is their composure, their refinement, the unnerving precision of their movements. You watch the exchange carefully. The boys offer a courteous nod, the kind one might give to passing strangers on a reputable street. The men return it with clumsy uncertainty. Nothing more happens. No threats, no statements. Yet the power dynamic is unmistakable. The boys' cultivated respectability speaks louder than any challenge. It forces others to reassess them, to step aside, to avoid confrontation. Respectability becomes a chain, not because it restrains you physically, but because it demands perpetual performance. Breaking the facade even once feels like a betrayal of everything the group has built. You continue walking, sensing how deeply the habit has rooted itself in each member. Even their breathing seems regulated. Their gestures are minimal, exact. They stand straighter when passing elders in the street, lower their voices when crossing the courtyard of a poor family's home, adjust their expressions when approaching someone who watches them too carefully. Every detail is curated. You notice how the boys avoid any gesture that might be mistaken for hostility. Their hands remain visible at all times, their movements slow and intentional. Not because they fear confrontation, but because unpredictability threatens their reputation. Respectability is their armor. Any deviation could fracture the illusion. A boy beside you murmurs almost absent-mindedly, "Carry yourself properly, and people treat you differently." The phrase seems harmless, but something in his tone suggests he has lived by it long enough to forget what it means to carry himself any other way. As you pass a shop with frosted windows, your reflection appears faintly in the glass. You barely recognize yourself. Your stance mirrors theirs. The straightened back, the careful stride, the distant calm in your eyes. The change did not arrive in a single moment. It crept into your posture, day by day, task by task, glance by glance. Now it feels stitched into you, as inseparable as the seams of your coat. A woman sweeping her doorstep stops briefly as your group walks by. Her gaze lingers on the orderly way the boys move, the neatness of their collars, the quiet assurance in their posture. She offers a polite nod, and you see the faint tension in her shoulders ease. Respectability soothes her, though it also intimidates her. That contradiction follows you like a shadow. You find yourself adjusting your coat again, unconsciously mirroring the others. It is not vanity, it is a reflex, one that feels strangely necessary now, as if appearances protect you from something unspoken. Yet the more you perform the role, the more you feel the pressure of maintaining it. In a narrow alley, one of the boys pauses to brush dirt from his trouser leg. The gesture seems trivial, but the urgency in it is unmistakable. Even when no one appears to be watching, they behave as if the city keeps a ledger of every crease and flaw. You begin to understand how tiring it is to live in such a world. The world of constant presentation, of silent measurement, of expectations that extend even to the tilt of your chin. Danger lurks here, yes, but it is dressed in impeccable manners. Threats emerge not as fists, but as expectations. Refusal does not arrive as violence. It arrives as disappointment, as blame, as a quiet erosion of standing. That form of punishment is more insidious than any physical harm. You imagine, briefly, what would happen if you forgot to maintain the facade, if you let your shoulders slump, if you allowed irritation to crack your polite expression, if your boots lost their shine. The thought alone makes your pulse quicken, not because anyone would strike you, but because you would feel their silent judgment, the weight of a standard unmet, of a reputation tarnished. As you continue through the streets, you notice how the city watches. Not with eyes, but with expectation. The gas lamps flicker like weak stars above you, their light pooling at your feet like reminders of the posture you must hold. Every door, every window, every passerby reads you, interprets you, reacts to you. Respectability here is not merely an external performance. It becomes a leash tied to the perception of others, tightening when they misunderstand you, slackening only when you align perfectly with what they anticipate. Your boots strike the cobblestones with measured certainty, though each step feels slightly heavier than the last. The weight is not physical. It is the accumulation of 1,000 tiny judgments, from the boys, from the residents, from the city itself. A chain not made of metal, but of manners. When you return to the house, slipping inside through the narrow doorway, the dim hall embraces you once more. The quiet interior demands the same decorum the streets do. Shoes placed neatly, coat hung properly, expression arranged into composed neutrality. Only then, when the door closes softly behind you, do you recognize the quiet exhaustion spreading beneath your ribs. Respectability has become a cage with polished bars, pleasant to look at and impossible to ignore. And as you stand in the muted glow of the hallway, you sense the truth settling over you. The performance will never end. Not here, not in this life. The house settles into a hush so complete that even the walls seem to exhale softly, as though relieved to rest after the performance of respectability. When you step back outside, the night has thickened into a muted grey, a colour that does not signal darkness or light, but something suspended in between. The air is damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and burnt coal, and the quiet feels almost tender in how it presses around you. You drift through the courtyard with no particular destination, guided more by habit than intention. The gang does not forbid you from walking alone, but their influence trails closely behind you, shaping your steps even when their eyes are nowhere near. The evening's lessons have settled into you in ways you did not entirely expect. Your shoulders hold their posture by instinct. Your gaze sweeps gently across the space around you, not out of fear, but because vigilance has woven itself into your rhythm. Drops of moisture cling to the railings lining the courtyard, beading like tiny pearls that catch the faint lamplight. The stones beneath your boots glisten, storing the remnants of mist that has passed through countless alleys before finding this one. Your footsteps echo softly, joining the muted symphony of London's nocturnal hum, the distant shuffle of someone closing shop, the intermittent clatter of a carriage wheel, the low murmur of voices obscured by thin walls and heavy drapes. You begin to understand why some people find a strange comfort in this gloom. It is not warm, nor is it inviting, but it is familiar. The city's melancholy wraps around you with a peculiar gentleness, like a blanket woven from shadows and habit. You feel it catching at your sleeves, settling over your collar, finding the spaces between your thoughts. It does not demand anything from you, not directly. Instead, it waits, patient and steady, allowing the silence to draw out the parts of yourself you haven't had time to notice. You follow a narrow path that curves between rows of buildings, leaning slightly inward, their upper floors appearing to whisper secrets to each other. The faint glow of a lamp overhead halos your figure, and the light shifts with each movement, stretching your silhouette along the wall beside you. The shadow feels almost companionable, though it bends unnaturally with every change of the cobblestone's uneven surface. The city murmurs around you. You sense a quiet pulse beneath everything, the rhythm of something worn but persistent. As you walk, your own footsteps fall into alignment with that pulse. The cadence steadies your thoughts, which have been drifting in unpredictable directions since the evening's conversations. The older members spoke with such softness, offering truths that slipped into you the way mist slips into cracks in the bricks. Their expectations drift through your mind even now, not harsh commands, but whispered reminders. Carry yourself well, speak with measured calm, let reputation shape your edges. You don't resist the thoughts. Resistance feels too loud for this hour. Instead, the rules settle into your mind like the dampness settling into your coat, soft, constant, and nearly impossible to avoid. The courtyard opens into a wider lane where the buildings draw back slightly, revealing thin strips of sky between their rooftops. The clouds move low, heavy, with the residue of soot and fog, turning the night into a canvas of layered greys. London rarely offers clear skies. Instead, it gives you variations of gloom, each shade familiar in its own muted way. As you walk, the faint scent of baker's yeast mingles with the metallic bite of rainwater, pooling in gutter seams. Somewhere nearby, a pub door swings shut with a muffled thud, followed by laughter that sounds tired rather than merry. You hear a cough from an unseen upstairs room, a dog barking once before retreating back into silence, the faint clatter of coal being poured into a bin behind a boarding house. London refuses to sleep, and yet it moves slowly, as though conserving energy for another day of the same weary rituals. Your path leads you through a smaller court, enclosed on all sides by brick walls. Ivy climbs along the damp stone, curling like dark veins beneath the lantern's dim glow. You pause there for a moment, not to rest, but to feel the weight of quiet settle deeper into your bones. This place feels suspended outside time, untouched by the urgency of the world beyond its walls. You breathe in the cool, heavy air, sensing how the city's gloom has become something you navigate almost instinctively. What surprises you is how easily this gloom begins to feel like a refuge. Not a pleasant one, no, but a predictable one. And predictability, as you've come to understand, is something the gang values above all else. You have begun to value it too, though you would never admit it aloud. The routines that shape your days and nights, the polished gestures, the careful tone, the even stride. Each one settles deeper into your muscles as though carving out new habits. The gloom softens those habits, blending them into your surroundings. There is no sharpness to anything here. Even the buildings seem smoothed by years of soot and rain. You walk quietly, and in turn, the city seems to walk with you, sharing its muted breath. You turn toward a row of houses with tight shutters and narrow doors. A few candles flicker behind slatted windows, illuminating silhouettes of families folding into their evening rituals. You watch for a moment, struck by the delicate balance of order and fatigue etched into the street. Every household carries its burdens silently, each person performing the role expected of them, much as you now perform yours. The realization arrives softly. You are not the only one shaped by expectations. London shapes everyone. A carriage rumbles past, both horse and driver wrapped in damp layers. The horse's hooves hit the stones with a heavy rhythm, sending vibrations through the ground beneath your feet. As the carriage fades into the mist, the echo lingers, merging seamlessly with the city's constant hum. You continue walking, the sound still resonating faintly in your chest. Eventually, your path draws you toward an older courtyard, one you haven't visited before. It is enclosed on three sides, with a narrow archway leading into it, like the mouth of a cave. The space is quiet, save for the gentle dripping of water from an overhead ledge. Moss grows thickly here, softening the edges of the stone. The air feels cooler, denser, as though the courtyard holds its breath. You stand there for a long moment, not out of fear, not out of weariness, but because the place mirrors something inside you, a stillness layered over something restless. The faint glow of a lamp at the courtyard's edge illuminates your face just enough for you to see the dampness collecting along your eyelashes. You brush it away, though the moisture continues to settle in the air around you. The gloom presses closer, and yet it doesn't suffocate. Instead, it wraps you in a strange, familiar embrace. You start walking again, slower now. Your footsteps soften, blending into the soundscape without tension. The cobblestones beneath your boots feel less foreign. Their imperfections becoming something you adjust to without thought. You notice how your breathing slows to match the city's measured rhythm. And somewhere in the midst of that rhythm, a truth emerges. A quiet, undeniable truth. The rules, expectations, and polished customs of the gang have seeped into you so gradually that you no longer distinguish where their influence ends and your own instincts begin. It is as though the city itself participates in this shaping, reinforcing their lessons with each sigh of wind, each flicker of lamplight, each shadow stretching along the walls. The gloom does not free you, it steadies you. It ushers you into acceptance. You walk back toward the house with softened steps, not because the night demands caution, but because you move differently now, shaped by routine, settled by repetition, guided by expectations you never explicitly agreed to. The door stands where you left it, narrow and unassuming, waiting without urgency. As you reach for the handle, a final thought unfurls within you, gentle as mist. The gloom has become its own kind of comfort, and comfort has become its own kind of confinement. A thin morning light presses at the curtained window, and you find yourself awake before necessity calls. For a few moments, the idea of leaving is like a cool breeze, sudden, refreshing, almost daring. You trace the outline of the room with your fingertips. The same narrow bed, the same chipped wash basin, the same faint scent of tea and coal that never quite leaves the walls, and the thought takes shape with the quiet clarity of something possible. You imagine taking a different route through the city, turning your back on the polite choreography that now arranges your days. You picture your boots finding new streets, your name untethered from the neat nicknames that sound like ribbons, your reputation unmoored from the group's careful hand. The notion feels like stepping into a gallery of brighter choices. It fills you with a soft, dangerous hope. You rise and move through the house as if testing the idea. Each motion is small and deliberate, buttoning your coat, knotting your scarf, listening for the sounds that would reveal whether anyone else stirs. The kitchen is empty, the kettle is cold. The quiet of the morning seems to encourage escape. Outside, the streets are slow with the kind of stillness that precedes the shopkeeper's opening. Your feet take you past shuttered windows, past the bakery, whose oven breathes faint warmth into the lane. For a while, you walk with the lightness of someone stepping off a cart, curious, a little reckless, and strangely free. You avoid the usual corners. You do not follow the path that always folds into the gang's territory. You let your stride lengthen without measuring it against the group's rhythm. But the city remembers you. It remembers how you have been seen and shaped. A woman sweeping her stoop lifts her head in that particular way that belongs to people who know each other only by observation. Her nod is polite. It is a recognition rather than a greeting. You feel its small weight as though a hand rested briefly on your arm. You pass without comment, but the movement of her eyes traces back like a thread, tying you to a place even when you try to step away. You tell yourself that small signs do not bind you. You continue walking. The further you go, the more the city offers illusions of distance. Broader roads, quieter courtyards, corners where you might disappear. Yet, every so often, a detail snaps taut like a cord, a boot print in the mud that matches the tread you wear. The faint echo of a voice that folds into a phrase the boys use. The way a vendor at the corner pauses and smooths his apron when you draw near, as though remembering not to offend. Each familiar response tightens the gentle net around you. The notion of debt arrives quietly, dressed in the language of favours and mutual aid. It is not spoken as a ledger entry, but as recollections shared over tea. The time someone covered your share of the rent, the night you were sheltered from rain beneath another's coat, the tiny amounts of coin you received when you first came, because you had none. Those small mercies are offered again, in memory now, like gentle receipts. Reminders that kindness here tends to be reciprocal in ways that ask for more than you think. You begin to notice how little you own that is merely yours. The coat you buttoned this morning came from another's spare bundle. The bread in your pocket was handed with a smile that carried no obligation on the surface, but beneath the surface, it feels like a quiet tally. You have accepted so many small things, so many gestures of warmth, that a delicate obligation has accumulated like dust. Glances too carry weight. A look from one of the boys when you pass the usual meeting place is like a gentle tug. It says without bluntness that someone saw you wander, that someone noted your hesitation. When you find yourself near the alley that skirts the gang's territory, you pause, feeling the subtle pressure of attention, even when no one approaches. Presence here operates through implication, the sense that others are arranging their day around the knowledge of you. You try to imagine refusing the implied requests that now make up your life. It seems possible in bold outlines. Decline a coin, answer no to a favour, refuse an errand. But the small consequences swell to meaningful tides. A neighbour who once smiled more freely now gives only the briefest nod. A shopkeeper who used to greet you at the door leaves counters slightly less stocked for you. A new cautious distance settles into interactions that once felt easy. The cost of stepping back is not violence. It is a slow erosion of the soft scaffolding you used when you first arrived. Politeness does the rest. Words are chosen like gentle traps. Do what you can when you can, a boy says, folding his hands in a manner that makes the suggestion appear optional. Later, when an unclearing must be resolved, the same phrasing turns into an expectation. The language here softens commands so thoroughly that resistance seems rude. Saying no becomes an affront to manners rather than an assertion of freedom. You discover how the network rearranges itself to keep you within reach. Errands that used to be random now take routes that brush the places you like to pass. Messages arrive for you from people you barely know. Invitations to small tasks, phrased casually. A favour if you have a minute. Refusal would be reasonable, but you see the implicit ledger. The favours rendered in your early days, the shelter given in rain, the coins pressed into your palm. To refuse would not be the end of the relationship. It would be a break in an accounting that everyone participates in. Then there are the polite threats, softly spoken cautions delivered with the warmth of concern. You wouldn't want others to think you ungrateful, someone says, with the lightest tilt of their head. It sounds like advice until you notice the undercurrent. Reputation will be recalculated, quietly, no proclamation necessary. The effect is not dramatic. It is the steady lowering of expectations around you, a subtle narrowing of options that is practically inevitable. Your mind drifts to how easily routine does the work that force never needs to. When chores are assigned, you do them because doing so keeps the peace, because a refusal would make future interactions awkward, because small acts of omission gather momentum until they become a pattern. When you miss a payment, a neighbour's smile thins. When you do not answer a discreet summons, a nod in the street is brisker, colder. The social fabric, once elastic, becomes taut. The idea of leaving loses its appeal as its consequences emerge. Not threats of violence, but a slow, polite rearrangement of your life. It comforts you in a way that tastes like resignation. When the street accepts your presence with the same ordinary gestures it would give any reliable resident. To be cut off would not be dramatic, a shout in the middle of a market, but a drainage of the small courtesies that made existence bearable. The choice becomes not between cages and freedom, but between two kinds of confinement, one of friendly obligation and one of isolating independence. You stand for a long time at the bridge, where the river glitters dark under the morning light. The water moves indifferent to your deliberations. Children run past, their laughter piercing the quiet for a moment, before the city swallows it back into the dull hum. Life goes on around you. The gang's world continues, whether you participate or not. The realization that your departure would not stop the flow, but would thin your share of its niceties settles in with the same slow certainty as dawn. You take a breath, feeling both the cool air and the weight that has accumulated within you. The choice narrows without spectacle. The net around you is not made of iron bars, but of the city's many small stitches, obligations, borrowed kindnesses, reputational threads, and the polite, practiced pressure of glances. Drift is quieter than flight. It allows the world to carry you a little further, day by day, until the act of leaving seems to require more than it ever should. You realize now that the path away from them is not a single step, but a series of small refusals that would together remake your life. Each refusal feels like an affront to the manners that stitch neighbours together. Each one creates a subtle change in the ledger, and you begin to understand how those changes accumulate. So you walk back toward the house with the soft acceptance of someone who has counted the cost. The familiar doorway does not slam like a prison. It merely closes softly behind you, the sound almost apologetic. Inside, your place is unremarkably usual. A chair at the table, a cup waiting on the saucer. The boys greet you with polite, practiced warmth, and the moments of banality return like a tide. You sit, you drink, you move through the day's tasks as required. The net shifts gently with your motions. It does not tighten aggressively, only enough to remind you that you are not yet free. You did not walk into chains, you think, only into company. But company, in time, has become a tide that carries you further than you meant to go. The day drifts onward with a kind of muted steadiness, and you find yourself moving through it as though suspended in molasses, slow, quiet, and strangely detached from your own motions. Tasks come and go, small courtesies are exchanged with neighbours, and polite nods fill the spaces where words would feel too bold. Everything feels normal on the surface, yet a weight gathers beneath that calm facade, collecting somewhere behind your ribs with the slow persistence of settling dust. As evening approaches, you feel yourself drawn again into the streets, not by instruction, but by an impulse to breathe away from the rooms where expectations accumulate too quickly. The lamps flicker awake, their amber glow spreading across the cobblestones like thin, trembling threads of light. You walk through them, absorbing the faint warmth they offer, and let the quiet stretch around you. This time, the city feels heavier, its gloom less like comfort and more like consequence. You pause near a wall mottled by centuries of rain, letting your fingers trace the uneven stone. In its roughness, you sense the same truth that has begun to settle into your mind. Nothing changes suddenly here. Everything alters by degrees, so slowly that you never feel the transformation until you realize you have already become someone you did not intend to be. Regret arrives not with sharp pain, but with a soft and steady calm. It is a feeling that sits beside you like an old acquaintance. You remember the early days when you stepped into these lanes with the eager hope of belonging. You recall how the gang's courtesies felt inviting then, how their quiet smiles and measured tones seemed to promise a place in a world that had previously felt too large and indifferent. You did not see the constraints woven into those gestures, the threads of expectation stitched beneath every act of kindness. You mistook ceremony for warmth. You misread order as care. Memory drifts forward, arriving in fragments. A polite correction disguised as guidance. A soft warning delivered as affection. A chore framed as an opportunity. Each moment seems innocent when viewed alone. Together, they form the outline of a pattern you chose not to examine too closely. You walk farther down the lane, your steps slow and thoughtful. The air carries a faint chill that slips into your collar, sharpening your attention. Your shadow elongates along the stone, trailing behind you like a version of yourself you're not certain you recognize. It moves when you move, but feels strangely detached, as though it does not belong entirely to you anymore. Regret settles more firmly now, but not in a way that demands escape. Instead, it spreads gently, the way fog settles into a courtyard. Quiet, inevitable, and utterly without malice. It does not accuse you for the decisions you made. It merely offers clarity. You see now how each small acceptance, each nod, each chore, each gesture of obedience became part of a chain that felt too soft to notice as it wrapped around you. Nothing was forced. Everything was offered with grace, and you accepted because grace is difficult to refuse. Even now, you struggle to pinpoint the exact moment when your choices began steering themselves without your permission. You wander toward a narrow passage between two leaning buildings, drawn by the dim golden light pooling at its far end. The passage widens into a modest courtyard where a single lamppost stands, casting its glow over a cluster of puddles that mirror the sky's muted grey. You sit on a low stone step, feeling the cool seep through your coat, and let the silence settle. The quiet here feels different, thick, almost contemplative. The sounds of distant carriage wheels and muffled voices blend into a low hum, like the background noise of a memory. You let your thoughts drift, and in that drifting, you see the early version of yourself walking these streets, hopeful, naive, eager to become part of something. You want to reach back and touch that past self lightly on the shoulder, to warn them that belonging can become a burden when the place you belong to expects more of you than you can give freely. But then you realize the warning would not have been heard. The charm of Victorian politeness has a way of making every decision feel like the correct one in the moment it is made. Another memory surfaces of a boy teaching you how to bow your head at the proper angle, how to phrase a reminder without sounding stern, how to accept a burden without appearing troubled. At the time, these lessons felt like a new language. Now they feel like fragments of a lullaby that disguise the cage beneath its melody. Regret presses deeper, though its weight is not sharp. It is the calm heaviness that comes when understanding finally arrives. When you recognize that you walked willingly into something you did not fully see. A light drizzle begins to fall, barely more than a mist. The droplets catch the lamplight as they descend, turning the air into a curtain of faint gold. You tilt your head upward, letting the cool moisture settle on your face. It feels grounding, almost cleansing, yet it does not wash away the quiet resignation forming within you. Somewhere in the distance, one of the gang members calls to another, their voices soft and composed, even in the rain. The sound reaches you like a reminder, not intrusive, but unmistakable. You listen without turning, knowing instinctively that they do not expect you this evening. They expect nothing from you in this moment, and yet their presence shapes your decisions, your movements, your stillness. You realize the subtle truth. You are no longer choosing your path. You are drifting along one shaped for you. The city's gloom reflects this understanding back at you. The fog thickens just slightly, muting the edges of the buildings. The puddles on the ground ripple with the weight of each raindrop, distortions fading almost as soon as they appear. Everything shifts in gentle increments, nothing abrupt, nothing dramatic. Just as your life has shifted. When you rise from the step, your legs feel heavier than before, not from fatigue but from awareness. You retrace your path through the courtyard, each footstep echoing faintly against the stones. The lamplight stretches your shadow again, thinner this time, as though regret has worn away parts of you that once felt whole. You continue walking, and the city's rhythm absorbs you once more. The glow of the lamps, the persistent mist, the soft hum of distant activity, all of it settles into your senses. Yet now, beneath the quiet, familiar comfort, lies an understanding that you cannot unsee. You belong here, yes, but not in the way you once wished. You belong because leaving has become too tangled. You belong because the customs, the obligations, and the polite threats have fashioned a place for you that feels inevitable. You belong because drifting with the current is easier than fighting it. Regret sits gently on your shoulders, heavy but calm, and you carry it as you walk through the dim, rain-hushed streets. It whispers not accusations, but recognition. You have been shaped more by circumstance than by intention. And as you reach the house once more, the quiet seems to greet you knowingly. You step inside, the door closing softly behind you. The heaviness does not lift. It becomes part of the night, part of you. The house quiets again, settling into that familiar hush that arrives only when the city has grown tired enough to leave its own thoughts half-finished. You linger for a moment near the door, listening to the muted breathing of rooms that have held too many whispers, too many quiet expectations. Nothing calls you outward, yet something in your chest nudges you gently toward the night. The same way a tide nudges a small boat without urgency, without force, simply because movement is what comes next. When you step outside, the midnight air greets you with a coolness that feels strangely personal, as if the city has been waiting for this private hour to draw nearer. The gloom spreads comfortably over the rooftops, softening all edges until the streets resemble charcoal sketches smudged by a thoughtful hand. You take a slow breath, letting the dampness settle at the back of your throat, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply London, distilled into its truest form. The street is nearly empty. A single lamp flickers above you, its flame dipping and lifting with each small twist of wind. The weak light casts a pale circle on the cobblestones, and your shadow moves within it like a silent companion. You walk forward with measured steps, feeling your body ease into a pace that no longer imitates anyone else's rhythm. It is your own now, though shaped undeniably by the paths you've come to know. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage rolls by, its wheels making a low, rhythmic groan as they turn over uneven stones. The sound fades before it reaches you fully, leaving behind a vacuum of quiet that fills itself with softer noises, the rustle of leaves against railings, the faint trickle of water in a gutter, the distant cry of a bird, confused by the lamplight. These sounds float around you like threads, weaving themselves into the night's fabric. You turn a corner and find yourself in a narrow lane that has always felt oddly detached from the rest of the city. The buildings here stand tall and angled, creating a corridor where the fog pools in thick, luminous sheets. It gathers around your boots as you walk, parting only reluctantly. The mist does not hinder you. Instead, it seems to welcome you deeper into its fold, as if recognizing the quiet understanding that now rests within you. There is no illusion of freedom in your steps. You're aware of the life you have stepped into, aware of the expectations stitched into your days, the unspoken rules that hold your nights. Yet you move with a kind of acceptance that does not feel like defeat. It feels like acknowledgement, like the settling of a truth that no longer needs to be resisted in order to be understood. The city exhales softly around you. Its breath curls through the alleyways, slips beneath door frames, winds its way through the branches of leafless trees that lean too closely to the rooftops. You sense that same breath brushing past your cheek, carrying with it the scents of coal smoke, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of bread left cooling in a bakery window long after the workers have gone home. For the first time, the heaviness in your chest does not feel restrictive. It feels like part of the quiet rhythm London has taught you. Slow, measured, a weight that settles without demanding an answer. You pause to lean against the cool stone of a building, feeling the subtle pulse of the city thrumming through it. It is not loud, not insistent. It vibrates like a memory, humming beneath the surface. Your thoughts drift without urgency. You see in your mind the small turning points that carried you here. A gesture accepted out of politeness, a task taken on because refusal felt awkward, an evening spent in a dim kitchen where threats were wrapped in buttered toast and careful smiles. These moments do not sting now. They simply float before you, like lanterns bobbing on water. Distant, gentle, illuminating the path only after you have already walked it. You push yourself away from the wall and continue down the lane, letting the city's gloom guide you. It cloaks you not as a burden, but as a companion, offering a softness that makes the night easier to bear. Even the shadows feel more familiar now. They stretch along the street in long, graceful lines, bending with the curve of the buildings, never fully still, yet never threatening to swallow you whole. As you approach a small square, where a fountain sits worn and chipped, you hear the faint trickle of water struggling its way through the stone. The sound is delicate, nearly lost in the air, but it draws you closer. You sit at the fountain's edge, resting your hands on the cold marble. The night reveals itself in layers here, the rippling reflection of a solitary lamp, the occasional flutter of a curtain in a nearby window, the distant rumble of a train shifting through the outer districts. You remain there until the quiet becomes a presence of its own. It is in that stillness that the understanding fully settles. This life, its routines, its expectations, its decorum, has woven itself into you not through force, but through the slow, gentle press of repetition. You drifted into it, step by step, gesture by gesture, nod by nod, until resistance felt louder than acceptance. Now the shape of it fits you like a second coat, not because it was tailored for you, but because you learned to adjust your posture to its seams. You rise from the fountain, not with reluctance, but with the ease of someone who knows that there is no hurry in this city. Midnight stretches itself generously, offering a long corridor of hours in which to wander. You walk again, your boots tapping softly against the stone in a rhythm that belongs wholly to you. A stray cat crosses your path, its eyes glinting like small embers in the lamplight. It pauses to assess you before slipping into the fog. Even that brief encounter feels like a quiet affirmation of your place here, a shared understanding between two creatures moving through a world that expects little more from them than steady steps. When you reach the edge of the square, the sky above you holds the faintest hint of silver, as though morning has begun to stir. The realization brings neither relief nor dread. It simply marks the passing of time in a city that never fully sleeps. You walk on, allowing the night to fold around you like a well-worn cloak. The gloom softens, the air steadies. Your thoughts settle into a quiet alignment with the world around you. And in this soft, inevitable drift forward, you find the quiet understanding that will follow you long after the night releases its hold. You are not free, but you are aware. You are not trapped, but you are tethered. Your life has been woven into this city's fabric, a thread pulled gently through each darkened lane, each whispered custom, each gesture of civility that shaped more of you than you ever meant to give. London breathes again, slowly, as though satisfied. You inhale with it, then continue into the thinning darkness, wrapped in the strange, gentle gloom that now feels like home. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.